He is one who I am honored to call friend, and he will be moderating our time together. I am so grateful to call Reverend Lamont Wells, who I am great to hear my voice back to. For those who do not know that sometimes I whisper because when I whisper, there is no sound. But my brother tells me I can whisper or I can talk anytime I want to. So I'm really grateful for him. And he is one that needs no introduction, but I am honored to say that Reverend Lamont Wells, Executive Director, the network of ELCA colleges and universities, will be our moderator for this afternoon's discussion. Would you welcome none other than Reverend Wells?
Grace and peace be unto everybody. This is a great day, a day that we have some serious things to think about, some things to create some action about, and that's why we're here. So it is a good afternoon for all of us gathered here as friends and family and co-laborers, I'd like to say, in this fight, in this struggle of advocacy and support. It's a profound honor to be present with us here today, particularly at the United Nations, just at the footprint of the building in the church center here on World AIDS Day, when the world pauses not only to remember lives that are lost, which is often the focus, right? But particularly to recommit ourselves to the sacred work of healing, the sacred work of justice and human dignity for every person living with and or affected by HIV. Today we gather under the theme, and this is important for us to understand because it's going to be the undergirding thing of what we're talking about this afternoon. Hope. I love starting right there. I could shout off of that if I were in church. But hope is important, particularly in this season for some that they call Advent or, those kinds of things are important. The theme is hope, healing, and human dignity, a faith response to HIV. This theme is not simply a title, but I believe it's a declaration of who we must be. We must be in this very moment. We stand at the crossroads, one shaped by remarkable scientific progress, which we're grateful for, yet also by persistent disparities that continue to fall hardest on the marginalized communities, people of color, LGBTQ+ siblings, women and girls, migrants, young adults, and those living in poverty. Despite decades of breakthroughs, which we are grateful for, HIV is not over. Stigma is not over. Inequity is not over. And so our work cannot be over. Now, y'all need to talk to me today. Can somebody say amen? All right. Today we gather in solidarity across sectors that do not often share a stage. That's why this day is important. Faith leaders and biomedical researchers, policymakers and public health experts, people living with HIV, and young leaders imagining a different kind of future. Y'all are in for an exciting panel today. We are here because the pathway to ending HIV cannot belong to any one discipline. It must be woven from science, faith, government, community, compassion, and courage. Each sector brings something the others cannot. As a pastor and leader in higher education, I believe deeply that our moral obligation must rise to meet the scientific possibilities that are before us. Ending HIV is not only a biomedical goal, but I believe it is a moral and spiritual responsibility. If we believe in dignity, if we believe in justice, if we believe that every life carries sacred worth, then we must also believe that the world has the capacity and the obligation to end HIV. But believing is not enough.
Yeah.
Today, I want us to issue a call to action. A call not simply to be inspired, because you will be inspired by these panelists, but to take the next faithful step towards a healthier and more just world. Our gathering today is not symbolic, but it's very strategic. It's a reminder that progress is possible and hope is still alive. And it's a charge that the world's most vulnerable communities deserve nothing less than our collective best. So my prayer today, as we've been prayed for in this particular session and in conversation, is that we share today those things that we know and can do, and those things that we're concerned about for the future of ending HIV/AIDS. So thank you for being here and for believing in a world beyond HIV. Today, I want to call forth today some of our panelists who begin to speak to us this afternoon. First, I'd like to call Dr. Ulysses Burley III, who is going to give us a biomedical perspective today. Dr. Burley is the founder of UB The Cure and the principal investigator for HIV Vaccine Trials Network Faith Initiative. He's also the chair of the U.S. HIV/AIDS Faith Coalition. Let's celebrate Dr. Burley. Next, we will have Ms. Destiny Forkpop, who is a student of the network of EOCA colleges and universities, a student at Muhlenberg College, which is in Allentown, Pennsylvania, who will be giving us the young adult perspective this afternoon. Next, I'll call Dr. Cesar Antonio Nunez, who is the director of UNAIDS, the New York office. There are many, but he runs the New York office, and we're grateful for him to bring forth the government and policy perspective. And finally, but last and but never least, my good friend, my ITC alum there, Reverend Sean Torres Anderson, who is the executive minister of St. Luke AME Church. Yeah. Right, Dr. Burley, I'm going to start with you. Your work has long illuminated the beautiful and often complicated intersection, if you will, of faith and biomedical innovation. As science continues to evolve, many faith communities are still navigating what that means for prevention, what that means for treatment and hope. So my first question for you today is, what emerging biomedical advances in HIV prevention, treatment, and vaccines or cure research do faith communities most need to understand right now?
That's an excellent question. Thank you for that, Reverend Wells. Let me first begin by saying that in the history of infectious disease, we have never eradicated an infectious disease wholly without a vaccine or a cure. And we don't have either for HIV. However, because of modern biomedical advances and because of advocacy, we can now consider HIV to be a chronic illness, if you will, where people can live an almost normal life expectancy. Granted, they have access to the treatment and care that they need to in order to do so. So some of those advances include prevention mechanisms around PrEP, which emerged now 10 years ago, but has since evolved from a once daily pill to an option for long-acting injections every other month, and now twice a year, every 6 months. And so that's really incredible for our prevention modalities. Likewise, treatment modalities have also advanced in a similar way. At the beginning of the epidemic, some people were taking in excess of 30 pills daily just to stay alive. And now people have the option of taking a single injection every other month. And we even have approval for an injection every 6 months for people who are treatment challenged. The issue is access and cost. And we're going to talk more about that throughout today's conversation. But those modalities exist, and that's because of years of advocacy, years of research, years of consistent funding for people to be able to make these advancements. And so we talked about prevention and we talked about treatment. I also want to lift up that while we don't have an effective HIV vaccine, that work continues to be done. I am a principal investigator with the HIV Vaccine Trials Network, which is the premier organization globally for finding an effective and safe HIV vaccine. And many people would say that we have been consistently failing over the last 25 years of the existence of the HVTN, but we don't call it failure, we call it discovery. And so through all of those unsuccessful trials, you learn what doesn't work and what we need to do better. And because of that, new science around antibodies, which we call broadly neutralizing antibodies, have emerged that really offer a promising pathway to hopefully experiencing a safe and effective vaccine. And then just last month, our colleagues at Cologne University in Germany reported that they have identified a breakthrough antibody that is showing broad coverage around HIV strains in humanized mice models. And so 98 to 99% effective against HIV strains in human mice models. And so that gives way hope as you started with, that perhaps maybe we can test this novel antibody in humans one day through clinical trials and potentially get to a safe and effective HIV vaccine where people never have to imagine a world or a life rather with HIV. So tremendous strides around HIV to render it as a chronic disease, if you will. U equals U, which is has revolutionized the way we think about HIV. People who are living with HIV, they have access to the treatment that they need. Not only can the virus be suppressed in their bodies, but it will prevent them from transmitting HIV sexually to their loved ones, which is a part of prevention, right? So treatment is prevention. So we have to make sure that everybody living with HIV has what they need to be whole and healthy so that their loved ones can also be whole and healthy. And that's truly how we'll get to the end of an HIV epidemic in our lifetime.
So that helps ground our understanding of the realities of where science is and where it's gone, where it's been, where it is now, and where it can go. And particularly, it's important for us to understand that as we engage our faith communities with this information. So some of the things that you talked about, many of our institutions of faith are not really leaning into that understanding.
True.
One sector that can help with that is our government area, right? That is responsible for community health and things like that. So, Dr. Nunez, the UNAIDS continues to remind the world that strategy without political will is insufficient. Policy shapes access. Policy shapes equity and opportunity. So, in light of the trending shifts in policy and funding priorities, what are some of the most urgent support mechanisms and partnerships, if you will, that are needed if we're serious about achieving global HIV goals?
Thank you so much, Reverend. It's a pleasure to be here with this great panel. Yes, political commitment is it's a word that is said very easily, but political commitment that does not come with budgets, it's demagogy. All right, and we hear a lot about that. In the recent past, we have seen disruption in the financing mechanisms that provide support to the AIDS response and to the agents that deliver that response. What needs to happen is we need to stabilize that mechanism of financing. Some countries after the crisis have started to find ways of providing resources domestically.
Mhm.
We're not going to be able, I mean, I have to be truthful about this. The amount of money that was taken away from the table, it's a lot of,
Yes.
so we're not gonna be able to fill in the gap right away. It would have been great if all of these reductions could have been staggered, given, some time. And at UNH, we had started working with some countries in the development of sustainability plans. Preparing the countries, preparing all of those who were engaged in the response on taking it forward. So the importance is to make sure that some funding is there, making sure that we mobilize also, if not the government, also foundations that can provide some money. And I would start by restoring some of the prevention resources, because we need to stop the line of new infections. If we continue having new infections, we're never going to be able to pay for treatment for everyone. So that is one important first step. Second, protect and fund community and key population-led services. We have seen how when the community is engaged in delivering services for themselves, that works a lot. Yes, we have ministers of health or government officials, but more often than not, there is a 9 to 5 schedule that, after hours would not work and would not bring any services to people who need it. Let's be clear, governments needs to have enough fiscal space in order to deliver, even trying to find resources, because otherwise it's like there is this, I don't know whether this is correct to say, but undressing a saint to dress another. It's a special a way of we say it in Spanish. But we need to partner with the ministers of finance. We sometimes think that we can do these things by ourselves. Ministers of finance needs to be aware of what the needs are when budgets are prepared. How do we get involved in this dialogue with our leaders in Congress? We often think only about the executive. We need to think about the legislative branch and how we can, work on them, giving priority for resources that need to be allocated. Beyond the country level, the regional level. In particular, I can talk about the African Union roadmap to 2030 and beyond, and the Abuja 50% health target that shows how domestic resource mobilization can be paired with global solidarity. The alignment of donors, multilaterals, and definitely the philanthropy. I think that even by bringing all of these resources together, every major financing compact now has to be tied to concrete actions of human rights. That's something that we have kind of forgotten. And every 5 years, there's an opportunity here in New York, right across the street. We're going to have a high-level meeting on HIV and AIDS next year. A political declaration will be negotiated. Are we talking at our country level, in individual countries, about the development of that political declaration? How those commitments that are made by member states are then going to be implemented, and how we actually ask for accountability of those promises. Let me start here for the moment, but I also wanted to comment on Lena Kapover later, because that's it's a game changer for the response.
Thank you. Dr. Torres Anderson, thank you for bringing your lived experience into the room. Your voice reminds us that HIV is not just a clinical category, but it's a human story. So what do you wish faith leaders better understood about the lived reality of people with HIV, living with HIV?
Thank you for your question. And I too wanted to extend my appreciation for the invitation to this panel. So I just want to locate myself just for a little bit so I'm a person living with HIV, and I have been living with HIV now for 16 years. And a faith leader, and a teacher. I teach middle school English, I think. That's important to lift up. I always try to lift up that in each and every space that I go to. And at the intersection of all of these identities, there's still a lived experience that I bring into the space because it is important for faith leaders to know that, you know, medically we talk about numbers but we're talking about people. We're talking about a person with a name and with an identity and with families. So I tried to navigate this space as a person living with HIV and as a person of faith and have these conversations with other faith leaders about the silence that is happening in faith spaces because of their uncomfortability to confront talking a conversation about sex in general. At the church that I serve at, we don't have those conversations, but we have an HIV and AIDS ministry. And most of the churches that I've served at, there has been a ministry that is dedicated to people living with HIV, but they don't have the conversations around sex or love or commitment or anything of that nature, nor do they have conversations with people who are living with HIV. It is always a conversation that is held by other people who either work in the field or who are credentialed in the field, but not a conversation that they are having with the people living with HIV. So one thing that I wish faith leaders understood is that while we're having these conversations, we have to include the very people that we're talking about into the conversations and bring them into the tables. There's this idea of centering those who are at the margins, and when we're having these conversations about people or with people who live with HIV, about people who live with HIV, we have to be able to pull the margins to the center and be able to have conversations with those people who are directly impacted or affected by the virus. So that's one thing that I wish faith leaders understood. And I also wish faith leaders understood that this is, as I heard earlier, this is not just a public health crisis. This is a moral crisis. This is also a religious crisis. And religious leaders, no matter what faith tradition or denomination, have to respond to this in ethical ways that does not demonize people who are living with HIV. Because a lot of that is happening. People living with HIV are demonized from sacred spaces because people who are having those conversations don't understand that human lives are impacted by the words that they say. So when we're having these conversations, we have to have them in ethical ways, in moral ways, and in ways that include people who are living with HIV.
That's so important. And when you talk about missing voices and people needing to be pulled into the center in the conversation, particularly people living with HIV, which are often either talked over, talked at, or whatever. Another group that is done that same way are young adults, or young population. So I want to ask Ms. Destiny Forkpop. So young adults today navigate lots of pressures and digital environments like no other generation before them. Silence around sexual health can leave deep gaps every time, every century, from every age. So what conversations about reproductive and sexual health, HIV prevention, or mental well-being are missing among today's youth and young adults? Let us listen in and lean into what's going on. Give us a picture.
Yeah, thank you so much, Reverend. First of all, I think that young people usually have these conversations. What's missing is that we really dig into consent, menstrual health, and how these topics connect to HIV prevention. And one thing that is also missing is access. Who can actually get tested and maybe ask questions without judgment. Coming from Liberia, I know what that means for people who actually want to get tested, but the resources is not available for them. And I think that silence and fear still shape our decisions of how we think about HIV. So I think young people just having the spaces where they can talk honestly about these issues without fear, I think it will help a lot. Yeah. So I think access is the huge thing that we don't talk about. But we talk about these things in fragments like TikTok, Facebook, Instagram. And we also talk a lot about in between classes, after just classes, we talk about it. So I think access is the big thing that we don't talk much about.
Yeah, access is very, very important. And sometimes, even when things are accessible, because of trust issues, right, that also becomes a barrier to access as well. So, Dr. Burley, one of the most challenging and important bridges I think that we must build is a bridge, if you will, between scientific truth and community trust, right? So, especially in places where medical mistrust has deep historical roots, particularly in the historic Black church or Black community, that's very, very true. How can clergy and congregations effectively bridge medical science and community trust, especially where mistrust is high concerning the needs of us ending HIV?
Yeah, thank you for that question. So let me first begin by clarifying that mistrust is a product of historic untrustworthiness. So oftentimes when we talk about medical mistrust, particularly around communities of color and marginalized communities, we talk about it as if it is the burden of those communities. You don't trust the science, and so you don't deserve to have access to it, so on and so forth. But that mistrust is valid and it's substantiated, and it's a result of historic untrustworthiness. So I wanted to frame my conversations in that context. COVID-19 pandemic was devastating for all of us, but it also presented a tremendous amount of opportunities for sectors to stretch. And the faith community was one of those sectors. We saw houses of worship become vaccination sites when people did not have access to medical facilities in their communities. We saw messaging around vaccines that were productive and positive. We saw the latter, but there's always going to be the latter, right? But we saw tremendous growth opportunities. And I think that position faith communities in particular to be more open and receptive to this bridge between what I call the science and the sacred. And it's one of the reasons why, the organizations that I either lead or am a part of operate at this intersection. It's because the community has been more willing now to be receptive to that type of work. That being said, there's still work that needs to be done. From the perspective of faith communities and faith leaders, I think we have to have a real reframing of what it means to be healed in our sacred texts and in our preaching and our messaging. For a person who is living with a chronic disease that is incurable like HIV, they won't be able to achieve that complete healing that often happens in our sacred texts. And so then we have to change our preaching. We have to change our theology around what healing looks like. Healing for a person living with HIV looks like having access to antiretroviral therapy or having access to long-acting injectables or so on and so forth, right? And so we need to adapt our theology for that lived reality. That's one thing. Reverend Torres Anderson already mentioned that we've got to have conversations around sex and sexuality. If we cured HIV tomorrow, faith communities will still have an issue around sex and sexuality, and some other issue would emerge as a result of that silence. And so we have to do a better job there. From the side of biomedical institutions, you have to know that you can create a product that is 100% efficacious, but if the people don't trust it enough to participate in it, then it might as well just be science on the shelf. And so that means that when biomedical institutions are writing their R01s and their huge grants for funding for these deeply scientific and clinical endeavors, that within those grants, they also have to write for community engagement. And not as a footnote, but as something that is as substantial of a line item in your research budget as the research and development that happens at a wet-based location. Because once you develop that science, you have to then trial that science. And you have to trial it in the relevant communities in order for it to be a relevant product when it's released. And that takes deep trust and deep relationships. And if we're talking about HIV, particularly in the United States, but really globally, where it impacts, people of color, that means that we also have to expand the pipeline for people of color to access health careers, to access scientific careers, to access public health careers, because people need to see their people in these roles to be able to trust what's being produced by those sectors. And so there's work to be done on both sides. COVID, I think, helped nudge us to forward, progress, but there's still yet work to be done.
That's important. You bring up the clergy need to really remodel and to reauthor kind of some of the things that we've been preaching about or talking about in various ways. And over the past whiles of life, I have been often criticizing the government about what it's doing. And Dr. Nunez helped me this afternoon already, because I'm always ready to say the executive branch needs to do this, that, and the other, but you expanded it to the legislative branch, but also ministers of finance. But my grandmother always taught me, when you start pointing fingers, you got to be watching both those things that are coming back at you, right? And I'm in the university system. So Dr. Nunez, faith communities and universities often serve as moral compasses, right? And they serve as research engines. Yet equity requires more than just intention, but it requires accountability and collaboration. So how can faith communities and research universities help ensure accountability to equity commitments that are responsible for our health in the world? And where do you see gaps in cross-sector collaboration that are limiting a just and equitable HIV response?
Thank you again, Reverend, for that question. So in the first question, we went from, okay, we need to have a policy, and we need to approach our political leaders in developing that policy, and then putting it to work. All right, we negotiated a ability declaration. Now we need to make people accountable. Okay, but then you have the faith communities have a moral authority. All right, to reach out and monitor. Right? This is what you agreed to. This is what you're accountable for. How are you doing, or how are you moving forward on this? And in that regard, I'd like to also mention that we also have to come ourselves in front of the mirror. Am I also adhering to, am I also accountable to, am I addressing the human rights? We talk about not leaving anybody behind. That's the language of the 2030 agenda, right? But when we're thinking about who's leaving behind, or we're being left behind, we think about somebody over there in the hills, or maybe in the neighborhoods that are so poor that we cannot reach. And we miss it when we're walking by in the subway by the guy who's, over there, former a veteran, or somebody who needs our charity, our law. Again, the moral authority to reach, to monitor whether the services and the resources are actually reaching the poorest, the ones that need. Our adolescent girls receiving education, our young women being treated correctly in the health system, our key populations not being left out. Stigma and discrimination abound, and I know that we're going to talk about that a bit later. The integration of literacy into the congregational life. Talk about HIV. And I believe that we just heard about the difficult topic of sex,
Mhm.
all right? Why are we so avert about sex when, I mean, God created it,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And I think that none of us would be here.
That's good. That's good.
None of us would be here had it not been for two people who loved each other and decided to, bring us to this world with God's blessing. So we can talk about sex.
Yeah.
All right? There's a song, I think.
All right.
Let's talk about sex.
Yeah.
Universities are part of this. Somebody talked about earlier about science and faith.
Hmm.
They go together. They can go together. And I think that universities have also this knowledge about monitoring specific indicators or go granularity. Yeah, we look at the data from a country and what's happening in this country. Yeah, but what's happening at the state level or at the department level? What's happening at the municipality level? What's happening in my community? Universities can, reach out to those data or, fund research that will give us some answers. There are some, obviously, data that can be from the social arena, other can come from biological sciences, but universities can disaggregate this data to show exactly who's losing out, all right? And design solutions with the communities. This is not a matter just to tell us, oh, I found out all of these important outcomes, but okay, what are we going to do about it? Let's sit down with the community. In this case, it could be the faith-based organizations, the religious community. How can we address some of these challenges? Universities can produce independent scorecards, all right? Okay, there may be a system there that monitors what the country is doing, but here as a university, we feel that, we're looking at this from another angle. The relationship with other areas. I already mentioned this. I may have mentioned in the policy question, executive, legislative, but here in the religious groups and universities, the relationship beyond health. Are we engaged with education? Are we engaged in social protection? I mentioned the ministers of finance before, and those areas that need to be in sync. All right. We also need to look at everything else that is happening around us. What about violence?
Mhm.
How about access to housing? How about access to work? How about legal protection? People living with HIV have the same needs as we all do, So all of those areas can be, bridges to have religious communities and universities engaged. Before 2026, I already said it, we can engage in the preparations for the high-level meeting that's taking place in June. And I think that it's something that cannot be left for later. We are in December 25. It's 6 months already. I'm sure that there is a lot of room for you to engage. And to be honest with you, I feel that it's important to have the vision of the faith-based organizations in all of these work around the response to HIV and AIDS. Thank you.
Ms. Fortpa, for real change, we must meet young people where they really are, actually are. So not just where institutions like the church expect them to be in their place. So what approaches genuinely resonate with young adults when it comes to public health? And how do stigma and silence around HIV impact your generation's behavior and health?
So I think that young people respond best to public health messages that are honest, respectful, and relatable. And I also think that faith-based outreach works best when it removes shame and treats sexual health as part of human dignity. And the most effective way to the most effective effort is blending spiritual care and practical information. Like maybe pastors hosting youth nights with like nurses to talk about PrEP. And I also feel like the best places that we can connect is classrooms, student lounges, campus events, cultural festivals, and we also connect best on online, Instagram, Facebook. I think the modern world today, that's where most young people connect. And I feel like the message lands best when it feels human and culturally responsible. Also, I think silence and stigma feed off each other. So stigma creates the fear and silence makes that fear grow. And when HIV, sexual health or mental health are now talked about, young people end up navigating everything by themselves. And what that leads to is hiding symptoms, avoiding testing, feeling ashamed or isolated. And so I think that I just actually read a book called How to Survive a Plague. It's about the HIV pandemic. And I think the church treated like people with AIDS so badly because they thought that talking about sexual health was sex was really bad and also using condom was sinful. And I think one thing that actually helped in that process for 6 million people to live was activism. So I think if we can incorporate that into preventing HIV, it will actually help because I think that HIV stigma and silence affect more than HIV itself because they influence like mental health and relationships and a sense of belonging. So with stigma, people with HIV will like probably will not have a peaceful place to live because they always have that feeling that, oh, if I go to this place, like someone is going to think less of me or this is going to happen. So I feel like we need spaces as well for young people to be able to talk openly about these issues without fear. Because as again I said, I'm from Liberia and it's really difficult to see like young people like myself talk about sexual health because it's almost like a crime to talk about that especially amongst people who are older than you. So I think we need more activism, and I think we also need to break the silence because we need people to speak up about what's going on.
Thank you for that. When I was about your age in the early nineties, when at some of the height of the HIV pandemic or HIV/AIDS pandemic going on in the world, and I lived in Atlanta, Georgia at that time, and I was a part of a faith community, very popular faith community there, and which actually sparked my activism because when I was a member there, singing in the choir, and many of my choir members and family members that were in the church community were dying at that time because they didn't have all of the advances that we're talking about today now, 30 years later. I saw pastors not do and perform funerals. Yeah. I was on the ministerial board and I was told what parts of Grady Hospital to go to and not to go to. Right. Subsequently, I went to seminary and then had CPE, clinical pastoral education. And even in those programs at Emory University, there were some stipulations that were made that still were steeped in stigma. So, Reverend Torres Anderson, stigma, especially in spiritual spaces, remains one of the most painful barriers to care. What forms of stigma remain most harmful within religious communities? But more importantly for me, and I want you to lean into, is how can congregations actively reduce them or change the mindsets or change their behaviors? What are those things?
So thank you. So this is it's a difficult question.
That's why I gave it to you.
Difficult question. So and I want to tie it into what I've been hearing. So Christians behave badly all the time. And I only talk about Christianity because that's the religion that I claim. I can't speak about other faith religions, but I know Christians behave badly all the time. And as someone who professes to be clergy, I almost feel that I need to repent daily for the sins of my clergy brothers and sisters and siblings out there. And because there is stigma that still exists, right? A family member and I were having a conversation yesterday, last night, around the idea of stigma as relates to like bathrooms. And my question to my family member, what is being taken away from you for someone who decides to use a bathroom that they feel comfortable with? And she was off to say nothing is being taken away from me. So we had a fruitful conversation around that. And I think when we're thinking about stigma as it relates to the church, the Black church in particular, there's still stigma around how HIV is transmitted, right? There's still stigma around what HIV actually looks like in human form. Oh, we're looking at this person. They lost the weight, so there must be something happening. When there are a lot of things that could be the reason why people lose weight, because they want to be healthy, right? There are conversations of stigma around, I remember when I was 14, the conversation that someone had with me to scare me out of a queer sexuality was that God would punish you with HIV, right? And that is stigma because that's not the God that I serve. That is not who God is. That is not the character of God. And I think some of how we get rid of that, sometimes we have to decolonize our faith as Christians, because the person who told me this, I promise you, did not hear this from God. They heard this said in a church setting and then begin to repeat those things, right? Once we get to a place where we can look or move within our faith traditions more closely aligned with what God said and what our pastors are saying, we will have a religion that is free from stigma. But I think the impacts of stigma on people, it's what's really happening. I remember having a conversation a few years ago when around this idea of the early parts of the HIV epidemic, of how there were a number of folks, and we don't talk about this often, who lost half of their friends or all of them to the virus. And we don't have intergenerational conversations with people who were here at the beginning and people who are here now. Because there are people who remember a world where HIV did not exist, right? And then there are those of us who live in a world where HIV was always possible. And we don't have those conversations. And one way to reduce the stigma is to have those intergenerational conversations around about joy and love and hope and what life looked like before 1980, and how we then can bring that into being in 2025, 2026. That's one way that we can reduce stigma, just by having conversations with people, just by getting to know people. I remember when I am a teacher, so I took off today. And my vice principal asked the question, "What are you doing?" I said, I'm going to have a conversation around HIV, because I worked in public health for 15 years before going back into the classroom. And she says she didn't know anything about HIV. So I started to have a conversation with her about it. And then she started to name all of these things and stigma, tithing language started to come up. I think one way to deal with it is we have to correct it when we hear it, right? We can't, as faith leaders, we can't be afraid to have those difficult conversations with people to help reduce stigma within our religious spaces or the stigma that we put out into the world. We have to be able to have those courageous conversations with people so that we can get to a world that's free from stigma.
I'm gonna bring it back. We spent a lot of time talking about what happens here in the US, and I know that many of us are primarily based in these yet to be United States of America. But I wanna go global real quick. Dr. Nunez, globally, we continue to witness stigma, right? That's important that we see in discrimination and even criminalization of people living with HIV. These realities undermine prevention and access and safety. So bring us up to speed and help us. What are the global current trends regarding stigma, human rights, and criminalization that require immediate policy attention that we need to pay attention to? And Dr. Burley, I'm coming back to you.
Thank you for that question, Reverend, and I think that this builds on what we've been hearing just now. We're seeing a very dangerous convergence of persistent stigma, human right rollbacks, and the expanding of criminalization that are actively undermining the goal of ending AIDS by 2030. So, for instance, our global report that we issued last week, it talks a lot about punitive laws remaining there, pretty basic. 168 countries, let me read from my notes, criminalize some aspect of sex work. 152 criminalize possession of small amounts of drugs, 64 criminalize same-sex relations, and 14 criminalize transgender people. And sometimes criminalize can be said very easily, but some of these countries, the death penalty is on the table. So it's not that you're going to jail, you're actually going to lose your life, right? And there is last year, you probably heard about decision by the Supreme Court in Uganda and followed up by other countries in the African continent about punitive laws for people living with HIV or just for people who have same sex, particularly men who have sex with men. So people living with HIV are also being persecuted, all right? There is doubt first. There's the lack of education. We have lost that part. And I think I was referring to the importance of information being shared in the community to be sure that they are aware. And you also pointed to that fact. You see, we keep on coming back to not only being informed, but also an information that really is discussed openly and analyzed. The key populations in adolescent girls and young women have faced layered stigma. We can see that stigma in the health area, in education, in employment, in the justice system. So, and some of you have talked also about the specific neighborhoods or communities that face that challenge. For us, getting rid of it, it's paramount. Yeah. We know that this we're going to be 50 years into the HIV pandemic in 2031. All right, so we already arrived at 44, 45 next year, and the stigma and discrimination are still there. Basic things like using bathrooms or sharing utensils or something like that. Things that those of us who work in HIV left back there so many years ago. In the medical arena, some of our surgeon colleagues demand the HIV test before surgery. But if you're going to use universal precautions, why do you need a test? All right, or are you going engaged in sex with this person? That you need to know. So this stigma discrimination remained a challenge. Discrimination and stigma come from long ago. We can go into the Bible and read about the lepers and how they hung bells on them
Mhm.
so that people could hear when they were approaching. You didn't want to touch them. They were dirty, they were sick, they were, they were impure. That kind of thing, that separates individuals because of who they are. We at UNAIDS call in our report that again, the one that was issued last week to address these issues. And this needs to be we need to repeal this reform of HIV specific and related punitive laws. We need to remove them. We need to invest in scale in the programs that would address this particular issue. I feel that throughout the number of years that I've been working, not only at UNAIDS, but before, that has been one of the most difficult challenges to address. And will remain the biggest challenge to address. Even when we have people on treatment, even when people are, I know of people with HIV with viral load undetectable, and still there's doubt. So that's part of human nature, I guess. And we'll have to at least reduce the impact that it has. Thank you.
Dr. Burley, you embody so much of this our theme, hope, healing, and human dignity. You lived at the crossroads of communities that often speak different languages and science and faith, and we know partnerships can save lives, right? I think that's a big takeaway that I hope that we have from today. But they also require courage to confront barriers. So what does a strong, functional partnership between scientists and faith leaders look like in practice? And what are some of the barriers, scientific, cultural, and theological, must we intentionally dismantle in order to accelerate progress?
Thank you for that. I'll keep my comments brief because I know we're getting the time. I want to lift up some of the organizations that I either lead or I'm part of. The HIV Vaccine Trials Network has a faith initiative, which I lead. We have faith ambassadors who are strategically placed around the country who offer that culturally competent information at the intersection of people's diverse belief systems. We have one here today with the Sultana Ocasio, who's our New York representative. She is a Muslim Puerto Rican woman. And so if you think about all the intersections, the ability to be able to reach so many different kinds of people with information that we otherwise wouldn't. And that's because of an investment made by the HIV Vaccine Trials Network through their understanding that we cannot effectively produce new products without community engagement at the beginning of the process. Not, we've got this product and now we invite you in and you let us come in and do what we need to do to get our product move forward. And so that takes investment. Again, it takes reimagining our people's budgets, but it also takes cultural humility and identifying those partners who have those relationships with the community, because that trust, remains a barrier. I also lift up the Center for AIDS Research, which has a faith and spirituality health collaborative around HIV. And they really work around implementation science, which is one of the newer sciences, but it's essentially identifying best practices in communities and then actualizing those best practices in science and in research, quantifying those best practices, resourcing those best practices. And so we know communities have been addressing our own problems for centuries. We just don't always have the resources we need to eliminate our own problems. And so if you can engage those communities, understand that you already know what your problems are and you know how to address them, we're going to come in and we're going to provide you with the resources to hopefully be able to eliminate them. And then we're going to give you the capacity to be able to continue to address problems on your own as you move forward. And so these partnerships are happening. You see pharmaceutical companies who are producing many of the drugs that we talked about today to control HIV, also investing in faith community partnerships, because again, there's a realization that majority of people in this country and in this world, whether they subscribe to a specific faith tradition, express some level of faith, express some level of belief, or no belief. And all of those belief systems play a role in the decisions that people make about their health and wellness. And as long as that remains the case, we have to continue to prioritize faith community relationships with biomedical institutions, academic institutions, and governments for us to get a whole approach to ending the HIV epidemic as a public health crisis.
So we're going to take some questions that may either be from online or in the room, but as a last kind of catch-all, I want everyone to think of your wow statement, your one idea that's coming up as we look forward to 2026, right? Which is just now, 31 days away from now, right? What is one specific commitment, scientific, pastoral, policy, or youth, young adult, children, community centered, that each of you believes could significantly accelerate the path toward ending HIV? I'll start with Ms. Work.
So I think one commitment that I have is to help with communities where young people are not afraid to seek testing, reproductive health care, and mental health support. I want to be able to build spaces where public health and faith work together, and where privacy is respected, and where no one has to choose between their health and their dignity. And because I think that ending HIV requires compassion, cultural understanding, and breaking silence. I think those three are required to end HIV and humanity as well. And I'm fully committed to being a part of that work.
Thank you. Dr. Nunez.
Thank you so much. Yes, a lot of compassion, and a lot of passion too, which people who work in HIV have. Passion and compassion. That's something very important. For me, a game changer, as I was saying earlier, and it was described at this table, is the innovation. Lenacapavir, the antiretroviral that is injectable twice a year, is going to make change. And this is just one example of how innovation works. Now, communities need to latch onto these innovation discoveries, or they need to promote them, and they need to monitor how they are being dispersed or implemented. As I was saying earlier, today, 2 million people will start receiving lenacapavir in Eswatini and Zambia. That's 2 million people, but we need to scale up. We need 20 million at least to make sure that we can remain on track to the end of AIDS by 2030 as a public health threat. Giving ourselves these kind of milestones is important, because otherwise we just keep on working. We don't know whether we are moving forward or not. Let's get some marks there on what is it that we're going to achieve by 2026, what is it that we're going to achieve by 2028, and so on and so forth. And that way we're going to then see for sure whether we have moved forward or not. I know that there will be several challenges, more than what we're facing now, but communities have been able to address them in the past and shall overcome them in the future.
Torres Anderson.
One of my commitments is to continue to build partnerships. And I know we talked about partnerships between religious spaces and public health spaces, but Christians do not have partnerships with other faith traditions outside of themselves, right? So if we're being honest, but every time we talk about a religious response, it's always a Christian response. And to have a true religious response, we have to be in conversations with other faith traditions, and then collectively come up with a response, and not just a singular response from someone in a column. So one of my commitments in the next year is to continue to have these conversations with other faith leaders of other religious traditions, and then bring that back to my community about this is a collective response that we have to respond to HIV.
Dr. Burley.
So I will end where I started. We have never eradicated an infectious disease without a vaccine or a cure. Lenacapavir is a game changer, as Dr. Lee mentioned. But I also believe that we will not end the HIV epidemic with medication alone. I also don't think that we can faithfully talk about ending an HIV epidemic without a cure where 40 million people will still be living with HIV. Despite what we could do to prevent future cases. And so we have to continue to prioritize vaccine and cure HIV research. And that means that we have to prioritize the funding for vaccine, cure HIV research before we talk about ending the HIV epidemic for the more than 40 million people who will continue to harbor HIV, regardless of the prevention mechanisms that move forward.
Before we conclude the panel, I want to just pause for a minute and open up the forum for questions from the audience. So, yes, sir.
Yeah, how you doing? This is a rough day today, but challenging, but stepping up to the plate. So I have HIV. I think about it every day. I am undetected, but I have like a fibrosis thing. So I kind of look at it like, because God is not me. I'm Muslim. I love everybody. I believe that God loves everybody. He's not me. So this is my purpose. And so I don't have a question, but I was listening to you guys, and the only thing I could think about was when Jesus told the leopard, the guy, the paralytic guy who had nobody ever seen him to walk, they told him to get up. And when we look at that, we look at confidence and competence. And that's what I'm seeing in you guys. Not only is your work from a medical standpoint and scientific standpoint and the humanitarian, but we see the bare manifestation laws in act because we see you're thinking about somebody other than yourself. And then you're implementing your intentions on paper, and then you're walking with them and you're showing us all how to do it. And so I can't question that. What kind of question would I come up with? I have to employ you to keep going, and I appreciate you. Thank you. God bless you.
Another question. Were there some online? Yes.
Yeah, so
I want
this,
to kind of hear you, so I've understood.
yeah, so we do have a few questions a question online. So one of the questions is, wouldn't it be wonderful if churches open their doors to regular private distribution, like what we do with COVID vaccines and Narcan trainings? Is that possible?
Yes. Short answer, yes. Long answer, I think one thing that we as churches or faith traditions have to get away from is this idea that we can't be a part of these conversations, right? We talk about, we work with people, we are in community with people, but religious spaces are smart enough to have these conversations and be a part of these conversations. So one, we have to get our faith leaders involved in these conversations to get the training and get the knowledge around PrEP usage, and then we can start implementing this initiative within our churches. And there may be churches that are already doing this work, because there are a number of pastors that I know in the South particularly who are connected to the CDC or other biomedical organizations and may already be doing this work. So how do we not reinvent the wheel, but look at the model that is already created and then implement those here within our churches? And that just goes to one of the areas of stigma that we talk about, how the North is more progressive than the South. And that's true, because in the South, they are doing a lot of work to reduce stigma and to do this particular work in general. So there are models. How do we then replicate those models?
Another?
Yeah.
Probably time. Got one more.
Okay. So this is a question for Dr. Uri. How do you think this increasing anti-vaccine movement will impact HIV vaccine work? And have you seen any signs of what the impact was today?
So I'll say that oftentimes we receive information in a vacuum. And we believe that the information that we receive is how everybody has received it. There is an anti-vaccine movement that's happening in our country, but it is not the majority of our people in our country. And I think we need to say that. There was a huge myth swirling during COVID-19 about the willingness of Black people and people of color in particular to participate in vaccines. And the truth was, Black people were the most likely to participate in vaccines. They just needed more information to be able to do it. And so I think we have to not make the minor narratives major narratives because it gives them power and more power than maybe they deserve. And lift up the fact that vast majority of people in this country and in this world believe in vaccines, that they are helpful. They just want access to them. And they want more information about what the outcomes of those vaccines might be. And I think if we continue to sound that alarm, sound that narrative, then we will prepare our country and our world for an eventual HIV vaccine when it becomes available.
Let's appreciate our panel for what they've done and what they've shared with us today. Ms. Destiny Fortcom, Reverend Sean Perez Anderson, and Dr. Nunez and Dr. Burley. I'm going to turn this portion back over to my sister, Reverend Dion. Amen.
Hey, but before
Before we disperse, there are two things that we want to do. I want to, my dear sister is going to come and join me first. But Reverend Palmer, would you mind the basket to help you? We are passing around this basket to you. There are some of the post-it notes that are there. We want to invite you to, we have a call to action that we are going to say soon. But I am inviting you now on these post-its. I have a dear friend, was my best friend growing up. He was a twin. And it was Derek and Daryl. And they were hemophiliacs. And I was the one who grew up then when the stigma was high. And family members were impacted, but one of my best friends was impacted because they had to have transfusions because of their health status. But we were not living in the most high access area to good health care. And they were impacted most. And I lost my friend. And I remember I was only 13 and didn't quite understand what was happening and why he was not able to get the kind of a care that others did. And why he didn't make it. Derek didn't make it, but Daryl did. And we had to live with what that meant for one to survive and the other didn't. He then fell into a deep depression and then ended up taking his own life. So this is personal for me because my best friend growing up lived with something we did not understand at the time. We were trying to prevent people from making fun of him and all of what that meant. On these little cards, there may be a name that you remember of someone who you knew was impacted or is living with it now. There may be a prayer. We heard today that that there are things that we must remember: honesty, be respectful, to make sure that it's relatable. Remember those three. I will never forget. And then we spiritual care. What is it that we need? Put those on these post-its. What do we need to see the world the way that it should be, so that all has access? On those of you that are online, you may have a sheet next to you. Write these prayer requests down, names that you will want to remember. And I will want to ask you to do this. And then we will listen. There's a song that we are going to play. And if you would bring them up to the altar space. And then we will hear you can take more than one.
Yeah, not each. Thank you so much.
A lot of the things are not working. Yeah, depends on.
Okay, it's okay. Think about it if you have your own pen to use. And those of you that are online, want to invite you now to do the same. What is it that we need for hope, for healing, for healing dignity? If you're in the room, you can bring it up to the altar and place it there. Even though I was lonely, what can you? Yes, and she won't forsake. In the presence of my Queen, here lies my head with warmth, and my heart. Those of you that are online, please fill our chat with the names. Fill your chat with the prayers for hope. To close together. Those of us in the room, we will stretch our hands to the altar space. And those of you that are online, stretch your hands out or up, put it close to your heart. And together, let us read these words as we close.
A new heaven and a new earth, for this we pray. A new heaven and a new earth, in this we believe. A new heaven and a new earth, for this work. A new heaven and a new earth, for this we build and bear the word together. May it be so. Amen.
Thank you. I just want to acknowledge a little gratitude that I have to be in this space with you. So thank you. Assalamu alaikum. Peace be unto you. All praise be to God, most gracious, most merciful. We gather as your servants, recipients of your grace and mercy. There is none worthy of worship except you.
All praise be to God.
I'm gonna edit the second part and add a little something that's not fit. We acknowledge our shortcomings and ask for your grace and forgiveness, which knows no bounds. I'm gonna add, we ask for the grace and forgiveness of those who have passed and those living with HIV. God, Allah, guide us with courage to be a community that is loving, affirming, and grounded in faith for our brothers and sisters living with HIV and their families. For those living with HIV, we affirm your full dignity and humanity. We commit to a world where diagnosis is met not with judgment, but with compassion, care, and community.
We stand against stigma and discrimination. We lift up the inherent worth and value of every life touched by HIV.
We acknowledge the deep inequities that persist, how poverty, systemic racism, and discrimination leave vulnerable communities disproportionately affected and without access to care.
Inspire us to dismantle unjust systems and champion equity, so that testing, prevention, and treatment are accessible to all, without exception.
We stand in gratitude for the blessings you have bestowed on us and for the gifts of the minds and the hands, scientists, researchers, and healthcare workers whose tireless efforts have provided us with powerful tools for healing and prevention. Verily, there's none worthy of worship except for you.
We bless the process of science as a revelation of your healing power. Help others use these advancements faithfully and justly.
Let us be a people who embody spiritual resilience, offering hope when there is despair, information when there is fear, and acceptance when there is rejection. The pathway to ending HIV as a public health crisis is illuminated by our faith in action. The progress we have seen is a testament to what we can achieve, and when science and spirit align, we have the tools necessary to make this vision a reality. Today we call upon ourselves, our faith communities, and our leaders to commit to these following actions. Commit to learning and sharing. We commit to educating ourselves and others about undetectable equals untransmittable. The power of PrEP. We will share facts, not fear, and challenge misinformation that harms. We commit to transforming our congregations into sanctuaries of support, offering radical welcome to people living with HIV, providing safe spaces for testing, linkages to care, and non-judgmental dialogue. We commit to using our voices to advocate for policies that ensure equitable funding for HIV services, support comprehensive sexual health education, and protect the human rights of all people, particularly those in marginalized communities. We commit to standing in solidarity with global efforts to end an epidemic worldwide, recognizing that a crisis anywhere is a crisis everywhere. God's mercy surrounds us and is without limit, and He does not tire of answering our prayers. We already have been given all the talent and the tools that we need to end HIV. Our charge is to believe it and move in this world knowing that it will be done.
With God's grace, I share commitment. We will work tirelessly until the day comes when we new HIV infections are history, and all people living with HIV thrive, develop, and succeed. Amen.
Thank you.
Beloved, how are we feeling today? In the room, there's a lot of energy, and we want to thank also all our participants who are joining us online. It is really my pleasure to thank you for this time that we have had together on behalf of all the co-sponsors, my office where I am, the Lutheran Office for World Community, which is also part of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, and all the co-sponsors that we have had here today, the HIV Vaccine Trials Network. We have had also our co-sponsor, the HIV Faith Coalition, the United Methodist Women. And so we are all feeling charged, are we not?
Yes.
Yes.
Now, maybe I should date myself, but I've been doing this work for many decades. You may not believe it. But what was striking me as we were hearing from our speakers in the various times that we were going through, whether it's worship, whether it's through the panel or through this call to worship, is how much has changed or progressed, how much progress we have now, and then also how much progress we have not made.
Yes.
So I was among the first young people who were trained in my church in Kenya. When HIV/AIDS in the early 2000s, I was trained together with others for HIV prevention, advocacy, and just really advocating for access to treatment. Those days when there was no medicine, and those who had the privilege of having it was this big one that for children who had no access to HIV vaccine, sometimes the adults will have to cut it. From the fear and stigma that we experienced those days, to the times when people were coming out to us, sharing meals, worshiping, hugging and kissing, those things that people are so afraid to do. And to be here now to just listen to how much work we have done around this, putting an end to HIV, but also how much we have not moved. Some of the conversations were exactly the same, especially from our young adult. This is what we were calling for those days, more conversations around sex. I remember we were actually trained on abstinence only.
Yes.
And I remember us going to conferences and sneaking in condoms to bring to our little youth office so that young people could have access to condoms when it was still not openly talked about or advocated for as one of the prevention measures. So I'm very moved, but I'm also a little bit scared that we are still talking about this and we're still advocating for funding and funding cuts, and we see the priority. However, we are people of hope.
Yes.
We are people of hope.
Yes.
Yeah.
And today we can celebrate that we have made so much progress. And those of us who are people of faith, especially those of us who are Christians, who have advocated among our and within and inside our own institutions to see where we are today, we have something to be hopeful about. But also, we are also hopeful and actually very moved that we are working together with many faith partners. I remember my first interfaith service, I was like, oh my goodness, but now it's almost natural to go do services together. We rarely go and respond or pray alone. So I just wanted to date myself to be like, oh my God, here I am, it's 2025, and it has taken me to 2000 when I was busy being trained, and I'm thinking, why are we not talking about condoms, to where we are now, but also hearing our sister Destiny with the fact that young people need spaces, and they have created their own spaces to talk openly without fear. And so I just want to thank you for joining us today, that this is not the end. Today we are marking this day because it is World AIDS Day. So we chose to be here today together in person and also online to remind ourselves, especially with the landscape that we are facing with a lot of budget cuts. And where do people chop money? Where it is most needed. We said we should leave no one behind. So I think we have been charged. We have our call to actions. We know what we need to do to advocate, to push, not just towards across the street where they're talking about this UN80 initiative and a lot of budget cuts, but also within our own organizations and institutions and the spaces that we find ourselves in to do our part. So I wasn't gonna talk a lot. I was just going to thank you all and send you forth and say enjoy the lunch. But I was reminded of my times when as a young person I was busy. This was what actually pushed me to do advocacy around gender, around environment, I was trained first to do work around HIV, and this was my path towards the fight for human rights. So thank you all so much. Thank you, my co-organizers. I just want to thank you and to appreciate you and your time for being here today and for joining us. And we will continue the conversations. Those who signed up online, we will continue keeping in touch and see what other opportunities that we can continue advocating, especially now when we have to not only monitor, but also follow up with the, as Dr. Nunes was telling us, the next big thing at the UN, which will be monitoring and pushing for strong language in the outcome document when the high-level meeting on HIV/AIDS is happening next year. So that is at least one key takeaway that we must continue working towards that. And we have avenues of us as faith people who have UN status to be able to suggest language that is reflective of the discussion that we have had here today. So thank you. Please safe journeys to those who have to travel back, and we look forward to seeing all of you again and many more others next year, because we will still do something around the time of the high level meeting next year. Thank you so much. Thank you. Take my lunch.
Take a lot for everybody who doesn't have. That's right.
It's something. Thank you for coming. Trust.
Thank you.